For more than 2 decades, you've heard the story of September 11th. But what if that official account isn't the whole story? Today, we're diving into a different narrative entirely. This is one pulled from sources that are just packed with unanswered questions, really strange physical phenomena, and an investigation that, well, some say was designed to fail right from the get-go. So that's a pretty heavy quote to start with, right? And it really gets to the heart of what we're doing here today. We're going to break down the core arguments that seriously challenge the official 9/11 narrative. We'll dig into the evidence and the claims that our sources present, all to really get a handle on where this deep-seated skepticism actually comes from. All right, so here's our game plan. First, we're going to look at the official investigation itself, because according to the sources, that's where all the doubt really begins. Then we'll get into the specifics, like the super controversial collapse of Building 7. We'll also touch on some, let's say, unconventional theories about the physics of it all, and we'll wrap up with claims about who might have known what beforehand, and all those big questions that just won't go away. All right, let's dive right into Section 1, the 9/11 Commission. Now, you might think the skepticism starts with the attacks themselves, but according to our sources, that's not it. It actually begins with the official group that was put together to investigate the whole thing. So the sources say that right after the attacks, the Bush administration was actually dead set against doing any kind of deep investigation. The focus, according to insiders like counterterrorism czar Richard Clarke, wasn't on, hey, how did our intelligence fail? Instead, it was all about using the tragedy as a springboard for invading Iraq. Okay, so when the victims' families put on enough political pressure to finally force an independent commission, this was the starting budget they got. To investigate the single most devastating attack in U.S. history, Congress set aside just $3 million. Let that sink in. And this chart, wow, it really drives the point home. I mean, look at that. When you put that $3 million up against what was spent on other big DC investigations, the difference is just staggering. The sources say this wasn't an accident or an oversight. They claim it was a choice, a deliberate one. The commission's own chairman even said it was set up to fail from the very start, which kind of makes you wonder, right? Was a real, thorough investigation ever even the goal? And it's not just about the money. The sources also point to some major conflicts of interest right at the top. The guy running the show, the executive director, Philip Zelikow, he wasn't some impartial outsider. No, he was a Bush administration insider, a close personal friend of National Security Advisor Condoleezza Rice. They even wrote a book together. The allegations get pretty wild, that he pre-wrote the report's outline before the investigation even kicked off, and that he was taking regular phone calls from Karl Rove, the president's top political guy, the whole time this supposedly independent investigation was happening. Okay, let's move on to our second topic. And this is a big one. It's really become a cornerstone for a lot of the alternative 9/11 narratives. The truly bizarre collapse of World Trade Center Building 7. So here's the mystery in a nutshell. You have Building 7, a 47-story modern steel skyscraper. It comes down hours after the Twin Towers fell. But here's the thing, it wasn't hit by a plane. And maybe the weirdest part for critics, the fact that it collapsed at all is not mentioned, not once, in the entire 577-page final report from the 9/11 Commission. It's just gone. So what we have are two totally competing explanations for what happened. On one side, you've got the official theory from NIST, the National Institute of Standards and Technology. They say that some office fires heated up the steel beams. One key girder gave way, and that set off a chain reaction, a progressive collapse. But then, on the other side, the sources just say, watch the tape. They argue the building comes down perfectly symmetrical, at near free-fall speed, right into its own footprint. And to them, that looks exactly like one thing, a professional, controlled demolition. So if we entertain that idea for a second, if it was a demolition, the next question is obvious. Why? Well, the sources point right to who was inside the building. We're talking a secret CIA office on the 25th floor. The Department of Defense was there too. The Secret Service had offices, and it housed New York City's Emergency Command bunker. The suggestion is pretty clear. Maybe getting rid of sensitive files inside those agencies was a pretty powerful motive. All right, we're about to go a little deeper down the rabbit hole here. We're now shifting to some of the more unconventional theories you'll find in the source material. This is all about the actual physics of how the Twin Towers came down, or didn't. So a central figure here is a physicist named Dr. Judy Wood, and she came up with a term you've got to hear: dustification. Her argument is that the towers didn't really collapse in the way we think of it, with floors pancaking on top of each other. No, she claims that most of the building, the concrete, the steel, turned into a fine dust while it was still in mid-air before it even hit the ground. And this quote from her really sums it up. A normal collapse, she says, is a process, right? It happens in stages. But what she observed on 9/11 was something else entirely. It was almost instantaneous. The towers just kind of, poof, disappeared. Okay, so for a claim that extraordinary, you'd need some extraordinary evidence, right? Well, the sources point to a whole list of weird physical anomalies. For one, there was no big seismic impact, the kind of earthquake you'd expect if two 110-story buildings smash into the ground. They also talk about how small the debris pile was, and how firefighters on the scene said the dust was actually cool to the touch, not scorching hot. But the weirdest one? Cars blocks away were described as being toasted. The metal was warped, paint was gone. But then right next to them, you'd find paper that wasn't even burned. It all points, they say, to some kind of bizarre energy phenomenon we don't understand. So, from the physical anomalies, we move to another huge area of inquiry, claims of foreknowledge. The sources we looked at argue that it wasn't just Al-Qaeda who knew something was coming. They point to some really curious stuff happening in the financial markets and within intelligence circles. Probably one of the most famous pieces of evidence you'll hear about is what was going on in the stock market. So in the few days right before 9/11, there was this huge, statistically almost impossible spike in what are called put options. Now, a put option is basically a bet that a company's stock is about to crash. And these bets were specifically placed against guess who? The two airlines that were hijacked and financial firms in the towers, like Morgan Stanley and Merrill Lynch. Just look at American Airlines. The day before the attack, the volume of these bets was 285 times the normal average. So the sources ask a very simple question. Who knew enough to place those bets? And it wasn't just the stock market. The sources also allege that multiple foreign governments might have known something was up. They point to reports that French intelligence knew about a hijacking plot way back in January of 2001. They claim members of the Saudi royal family had direct financial ties to the hijackers. And this one is pretty disturbing, that the NSA was sharing key intelligence with foreign allies, but was holding that same info back from our own CIA. When you put all that together, it paints a picture not of an intelligence failure, but maybe of intelligence being intentionally kept in the dark. And all of this brings us to our final section. After looking at the commission, the physics, the claims of foreknowledge, what we're left with is a whole bunch of really sharp questions that, according to these sources, the official story has just never managed to answer. Let's start with the crime scene itself. Why was the steel from the World Trade Center, the most crucial piece of forensic evidence you could ask for, almost immediately scooped up and shipped overseas to be recycled? It basically made a proper forensic investigation of the collapse impossible. Then there's the Pentagon. Why is it that for an attack on what has to be one of the most surveilled buildings on planet Earth, a place just covered in cameras, we've only ever officially seen a couple of grainy video clips that show, well, not much of anything? And what about the Flight 93 crash site? How did a hijacker's passport get found, supposedly in perfect condition, when the crash itself was apparently so violent that it vaporized a massive jetliner, leaving almost nothing behind? And all of those questions really boil down to this one final provocative thought that's at the heart of all these theories. If the official story is full of holes, if evidence was ignored or destroyed or kept hidden, the sources are left asking a pretty simple question. Who or what was the official story meant to protect?